the instinctive tendency to speak, as we see in the babble of our young children, but no child has the instinctive tendency to bake, brew, or write. This quote was by Charles Darwin, naturalist, biologist, and geologist, best known for his theory on evolution. So what he meant in this quote is that language is a human instinct and comes naturally to us. But things such as baking and writing has to be taught through instruction and schooling. So when I first heard about language, I thought language was all about using the vocal cords, larynx, and speaking. But I realized that's not all to it. Language is also the ability to absorb and comprehend sentences and to use grammar. And I believe that larynx and using our vocal cords is a communication aspect of it. So let's take an example. ASL users, American Sign Language users, use hand gestures to communicate, just like how we use speaking to communicate as well. They use ASL, like their hand gestures, in order to make grammar, to make sentences, and just similar to what we can do with our voice. In the 1980s, Nicaragua put all their deaf and mute students all in one school. They had no other prior knowledge to any sign or spoken language beforehand. And while the teachers were trying to figure out a way in order to communicate to them so that they could teach them, of course, the students were able to come up with their own sign language known as Idioma de Señas de Nicaragua, also known as ISN. This sign language had a proper grammar as well as proper sentence structure and had complex sentences as well. These students were able to come up with a language of what seems like thin air, but was it really out of thin air? Here's where the linguist Noam Chomsky comes in. In the 1960s, he came with the controversial idea of the language acquisition device, where we have language processing structures in our brains. We can reduce complex sentences to things such as nouns, verbs, and adjectives. And there was also someone else who supported this idea. And this is, I'm sure, a familiar name to most of us, Plato, an Athenian philosopher back in ancient Greece. Plato believed in the idea of innatism, where we are born with some knowledge from birth, and he included one of these knowledges as language. However, there was many people totally against this idea, and one of these people was John Locke, an English philosopher in the 1600s. He believed in the idea of a tabula rasa, where we are also known as a blank slate, where everything we know now is all just taught to us and nothing is innate or inborn. And this is similar to what B.F. Skinner, an American psychologist in the 1900s, believed in. So when Noam Chomsky first had his theory back in the 1960s, B.F. Skinner's idea on operant conditioning, where basically he said that we learn language through rewards and punishments, that was the most popular theory at the time and most widely accepted. In operant conditioning, there's three types of responses: neutral operants, rewards, and punishers. So how did he experiment this? So what he did was that he used a box and he put a rat in it with a lever and a food pellet, so that whenever the rat hit the lever, a food pellet would drop down. So after some time, the rat accidentally hit against the sides of the box and accidentally hit the lever and then got a food pellet. So now the rat learned that if it did the same sort of pattern of events, it would continue to get its food pellet. And this reinforces the fact that rewards can encourage a behavior. So in the second part of the experiment, B.F. Skinner made it so that whenever the rat hit the sides of the box, an electric current would shoot up. So now what the rat did was that it went directly to the lever so that it could avoid being shocked. So let's take another example. For example, every time you don't do your homework, you have to pay your teacher. So now you would just do the homework so you could avoid that altogether. Now there's also punishers in operant conditioning as well, where meaning it would discourage you from doing that behavior, so such as it would discourage you from doing your homework, and discourage the rat from going to the lever and then getting the food pellet. For example, maybe if you poisoned the food pellet, it would avoid trying to eat it. Now, this makes perfect sense for behaviors, as we can see what happens with the rat. But it doesn't make complete sense for language. For starters, we simply have not been trained what to say. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are probably raising your eyebrows right now, but it makes sense. I'm sure we've all noticed that children can make simple mistakes, such as saying things, "I holded it." Now, you wouldn't say this isn't proper grammar, you wouldn't say "I held it," but if you really think about it, the child is using hold, the verb hold, in the right placement of the sentence. And also this proves that this cannot be an imitation, as I'm sure the parents would never say "I holded it," but rather they would say "I held it." And this shows that this baby or this child has an innate ability for language, and that it's a human instinct to use sentence structures. And also, speaking from personal experience, I remember when I was younger making these type of mistakes frequently, and it's not like any of my fellow adults surrounding me ever said something like this. And I would also make nonsensical sentences that I'm sure no one would have ever made around me. Now, in order to test Noam Chomsky's theory even more, another study was done at Columbia University using a chimpanzee known as Nimchinsky, and yes, this chimpanzee was named after Noam Chomsky, of course. So this chimp was raised just like a human being. It was taught ASL and just hand gestures so that it would be able to communicate and they wanted to see how the progression of this chimpanzee would be. So after some time, when they decided to review this chimp to see how it was doing, they realized something. Yes, the chimpanzee was able to make simple sentences to ask, like, I want food, but it was nowhere as complex as what humans could do. And humans are able to use language in order to express feeling and to use emotions. But this is simply not what a chimpanzee could do. And this shows that language is something special to humans and something that's a human instinct and cannot be taught or learned. Now, there's still a debate going on to this day about how Noam Chomsky's theory doesn't have enough evidence and it's very far-fetched. And while I would argue that this idea of a language acquisition device spearheaded many linguistic studies and made so many more theories down the line, as well as changing many on how they perceived the acquisition of language. And I believe that motorics is in language, and that it's all about the cognition, so that now we should focus more on how the brain works whenever someone uses language, so we can find out about how language is exactly acquired and we can know more about it. And this is what I call change. Thank you.